The opening scene of Starting Over unfolds with a deceptively gentle intimacy, framing Freya and Cadence's first shared moments as both ordinary and quietly charged. The kind of domestic pause that feels suspended between what was lost and what might begin again. A feeling that echoes the wistful optimism of John Lennon's Just Like Starting Over, which hovers like an unspoken thesis over the scene as Cadence surveys the wreckage of her former life, and Freya instinctively offers presence rather than solutions. From the start, the wine, the jokes, and the awkward humor establish a tone of survival through connection, one that many queer women will recognize as familiar, especially when rebuilding after a relationship that promised permanence but delivered erasure. Cadence's grief is not melodramatic. It is quiet, disoriented, and riddled with self-blame, shaped by the cultural expectation that adulthood follows a neat progression of marriage, career, and stability, an expectation that collapses for her all at once. Freya's response, "You have me," may sound light, but it carries emotional weight, offering companionship as an alternative to the traditional markers of success Cadence feels she has failed to maintain. Their banter about roommates and wives cleverly destabilizes heteronormative assumptions without spectacle, allowing queerness to exist as humor, possibility, and ease rather than declaration. When Cadence jokes about being the one swapped out in her marriage, the line lands with a familiar sting for lesbian audiences who have experienced disposability within systems that promise commitment but reward conformity. And Freya's immediate discomfort reveals her instinct to protect rather than probe, a dynamic that positions her as someone already accustomed to tending emotional wounds. The recurring physical gestures, Freya's reassuring touch, her quiet presence, are framed not as entitlement but as grounding, emphasizing how care between women often manifests through proximity and attentiveness rather than grand gestures. As Cadence confesses the betrayal, still using a gender-neutral they, the script smartly avoids anchoring her pain in a specific identity, instead centering the universal ache of being replaced and the compounded humiliation of having begged someone who had already chosen to leave, a moment that speaks to the internalized shame many women carry when they believe endurance equals worth. Cadence's admission that she stayed out of fear of failure rather than love resonates deeply within queer narratives, where relationships are often burdened with the expectation of proving legitimacy, making endings feel like personal and political defeats. Freya's insistence that Cadence is destined for greatness could read as cliché, but in context it functions as counter-programming, gently pushing back against a culture that teaches women to measure themselves by who stays rather than who they are becoming. The kiss that follows is not framed as conquest or rescue, but as interruption, a rupture in Cadence's spiral of self-loathing, and her immediate retreat underscores the careful negotiation of boundaries that often accompanies queer intimacy, especially when vulnerability and attraction collide. Cadence's fear of hurting Freya reflects a broader anxiety many women feel when desire emerges during periods of instability, a fear amplified for queer women who have been told their love causes damage simply by existing. Freya's clarification, that she is not demanding a future, only the present, reframes intimacy as choice rather than obligation, aligning closely with Lennon's refrain about beginning again not as repetition but as conscious renewal. When Cadence expresses relief at the idea of something casual, her response highlights how seriousness has been imposed on her before she was ready, mirroring how women's relationships are often expected to justify themselves immediately, especially outside heterosexual norms. The scene carefully walks the line between tenderness and hesitation, allowing Cadence to explore desire without pressure while acknowledging that even fun can be radical when it is freely chosen. Freya's role becomes symbolic here. She represents the woman who has already survived the implosion Cadence fears, offering not answers but permission, while Cadence embodies the moment before reinvention, standing on the threshold of a life that no longer fits but has not yet been replaced. The discomfort society holds toward women expressing love for each other lingers beneath the surface, visible in Cadence's instinct to downplay her needs, and Freya's effort to soften her own desire, both negotiating visibility without punishment. That discomfort persists because scenes like this challenge the idea that women's intimacy must be explained, delayed, or sanitized, instead presenting it as natural, mutual, and emotionally intelligent. Just like Starting Over, the scene does not promise a clean slate, but it does suggest that beginning again can be an act of courage rather than defeat, especially when two women choose to see each other clearly in a moment of shared fragility. For lesbian and LGBTQ+ viewers, the scene offers recognition rather than fantasy, portraying connection as messy, negotiated, and deeply human. While for women more broadly, it affirms the longing to be held without being fixed, to be desired without being claimed, and to believe that starting over is not an admission of failure, but a reclamation of self. Scene 2 of Starting Over deepens the film's emotional thesis by shifting from private healing into the vulnerable act of self-definition. framing Cadence's collaboration with Jaden Cole not merely as a professional consultation, but as a mirror held up to everything Cadence has been taught to suppress about herself, especially her femininity, her intuition, and her desire to take up space. And in doing so, the scene quietly hums with the spirit of John Lennon's, just like starting over, not as nostalgia, but as an insistence that reinvention is an ongoing, courageous choice. Cadence's terror at beginning again is immediately legible to queer audiences who understand how starting over often means reclaiming parts of the self that were minimized within heterosexual hierarchical systems, particularly marriages that rewarded compliance over creativity. Her confession that nothing she did was ever good enough speaks to a familiar gendered erosion of confidence, where ambition becomes something to apologize for and passion becomes a threat rather than a gift. And Jaden's calm recognition of Cadence's vision offers a corrective gaze that does not attempt to fix her, only to see her. The language of space and design becomes symbolic here, as Cadence wants the home to be her calling card, an outward declaration of who she is becoming, echoing Lennon's idea that our life together is so precious together, we have grown, even when that growth has been painful and nonlinear. Jaden's invitation to come tell me who you are is radical in its simplicity, asking Cadence to define herself not through loss or fear but through intention, and Cadence's discomfort with the word feminine reveals how deeply she has internalized the idea that softness equals weakness. This moment resonates broadly with women who have learned to armor themselves against dismissal, and particularly with queer women who have been taught that femininity must be justified, performed, or rejected entirely to be taken seriously. Jaden's reframing of femininity as intuition, endurance, and power gently dismantles that binary, challenging a culture that fears women's embodied knowledge and emotional intelligence because it cannot easily be controlled. The intensity Cadence feels under Jaden's gaze is not predatory or exploitative. It is the discomfort of being truly seen, of having one's potential acknowledged without irony, and that kind of recognition can feel frightening when a person is still learning to trust themselves. The scene's pacing mirrors this internal tension, moving from the open living room to the more intimate bedroom, not to heighten spectacle but to underscore how self-truth often emerges in quieter enclosed spaces where defenses drop. Jaden's assertion that Cadence has changed suggests that starting over is not about erasing the past, but about allowing growth to become visible, a sentiment that aligns with the song's refrain about falling in love again not with another person, but with oneself. When Jaden insists that Cadence must believe in her own authority if she wants others to respect, the moment lands as both professional advice and emotional truth, reflecting how queer women are often pressured to downplay confidence to remain palatable. Cadence's eventual admission of attraction is less about desire than about agency. It is the first time she names what she wants without apology, embodying the lyrics' quiet urgency of "Don't let another day go by" and choosing presence over fear. Jaden's response, affirming Cadence's leadership rather than taking control, resists the trope of rescue and instead models mutual respect, allowing the connection to feel grounded rather than transactional. The kiss that closes the scene functions symbolically as a seal on Cadence's reclamation of self, not an endpoint but a beginning, suggesting that intimacy can coexist with ambition and that desire does not diminish seriousness. Society's discomfort with scenes like this persists because they refuse to frame women's connection as either tragic or taboo. Instead, they present it as generative, collaborative, and quietly transformative. For lesbian and LGBTQ+ viewers, the scene offers recognition of the slow, often internal work of becoming visible, while for women more broadly it affirms that starting over is not failure but flight, a spreading of wings after being grounded too long, and like Lennon's song suggests, it is not about returning to who you were, but choosing, again and again, who you are becoming.